Do you ever feel like your chord progressions sound kinda dull and bland, but you can't quite figure out how to add that spice to your chords like everyone else you see online? Well, in this video, we're breaking down how to take your progressions from this to this. This is level 3 in my 7-part How to Make Chord Progressions series, so if you get confused on anything, feel free to check out level 1 and 2 where I go over how to make and structure simple chord progressions. But without further ado, let's get started. The main way we can spice up our progressions is by swapping out the major and minor chords in a key with some new chords that can sound a bit more interesting. Let's start with suspended chords. Suspended, or sus chords as you'll usually see them, are the first of many chords I'll talk about in this video that I like to call tension chords. They're a type of chord that easily builds tension, so naturally most of these sound best in our dominant 5, but in the case of sus chords, they don't always need to be played on the 5 to sound good. The main two types of sus chords, sus2 and sus4, can be used anywhere you can normally play major or minor chords in the chord scale, with the exceptions being that sus2 chords aren't usually played on the 3 and sus4 chords aren't usually played on the 4. And here are the most common movable shapes for both sus2 and sus4 chords. Now there's a few different ways you can use them in a progression. First, you could play a sus chord to build tension and then resolve it by moving to a different non-sus chord. For example, you could go from 5 as a sus chord resolving to 1, or 2 as a sus chord resolving to 6. Another way to use them is after playing a sus chord, you could change it back to its major or minor shape depending on which it was originally in the chord scale. Let's try a 6-4-1 and make the 1 a sus chord to create tension and then turn it back into a major chord to resolve it. We'll do 1 with a sus2 and then 1 with a sus4. And lastly, you could swap between the sus2, sus4, and major/minor chord depending on where you're playing it to create a lot of movement inside of a single chord. This works well on all the chords I mentioned you could play sus chords on, but you'll see it most commonly used on a tonic at the end of a progression. I'm going to show you 2 examples of this movement, one with the major tonic and one with the minor tonic so you can hear how both sound. And also, since there's no easy E string sus2 shape, you can realistically only do this using the A string shapes we've learned. And here are a couple more ideas of how you can use sus chords. Now let's take a look at the concept of borrowing chords. We're gonna go way more in depth on this in later levels, but this basically just means that you're adding chords to your progression that are outside of the regular major chord scale. As an example, if we're in the key of C major and I play an A flat major chord, that would be considered an outside chord because it's not one of the 7 chords you'd normally find in that key. And in this case, the A flat major would be identified as a flat 6 or sharp 5 chord because the root note is in between the 5 and 6 in the key of C major. But we'll worry more about using this type in later levels. The main type of outside chord I wanted to show you is where you change a major or minor chord from the chord scale to the opposite quality. So this means changing a chord that's usually minor, like 2, 3, or 6, to a major chord, or vice versa for all the chords that are usually major. And one of the most commonly used of these is the major 3 chord, which means you change the 3, which is usually minor, to major. And even though it technically doesn't belong inside the scale, it can make the 3 sound a little more exotic and interesting to listen to. While in this case, changing the function of the chord from subdominant to dominant, which resolves extremely well to either tonic, but especially to the minor tonic. This is also called a secondary dominant, but we'll talk more about that in level 5. And here's a few examples of how you can use the major 3 in a progression. Next up, I want to talk about what I like to call the RNB chord scale. The RNB chord scale is where we replace our major and minor chords in the major chord scale with their slightly cooler siblings, the 7th chords. There's 3 main types of 7th chords: major 7ths, minor 7ths, and dominant 7ths. The major 7th can typically replace 2 of our major chords, 1 and 4. The minor 7th can replace all of our minor chords, so 2, 3, and 6. And the dominant 7th, which is a tension chord, just like suspended chords, can replace our dominant in the chord scale 5 along with the 3. But just to be clear, dominant 7th chords and every other dominant chord that we'll take a look at are chords that sound best on the dominant but don't have to strictly be played there. They're still just a chord that can be moved around freely into any spot you want, but this is not the same as the dominant function. The dominant function, like we talked about in level 2, is a role that is assigned to a chord to build tension based on its location in the chord scale, and this is regardless of if the chord itself is dominant or not. Like in many of the previous examples, I used a major chord on the 5. The chord itself is not dominant, sure, but because the function of the 5 is dominant, it's still serving its purpose of building tension in whatever progression it's used in. Now if we replace all of our major and minor chords with these 7th chords, that makes the RNB chord scale major 7, minor 7, or dominant 7, major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, diminished. You can definitely hear that it adds a bit of warmness to the chords that they didn't quite have before. And to show off how good 7th chords sound, I'm going to play a 4, 2, 6, 3 progression twice, one with regular major and minor chords and the other with 7th chords, just so you can hear the difference. Let's try a few more progressions with some 7th chords mixed in. Now at this stage, I definitely recommend messing around with all the different chords we've covered up to this point. This gives you a healthy variety of shapes you can use to figure out which chords best fit your style and progressions without being too overwhelming. Because to be honest, we've only scratched the surface of chord extensions and variations that we can swap out to make our progressions sound even more sophisticated. And if you want to dive deep into more than just chord progressions on guitar and have been struggling to figure it out on your own, I recommend checking out my course Guitar Accelerator. It's a huge library of lessons where I guide you through everything I know on guitar and how to apply it into your playing, put into an easy to follow roadmap that any guitarist can jump into, along with a supportive Discord community where you can ask me questions and interact with other like-minded guitarists. And if that's not for you, you can check out my Patreon where you'll get early access to every new video completely ad-free, along with tabs for all of my arrangements. And you can take a look at both of those in the description below. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is go through a bunch of common chord extensions, which is just a fancy way of saying jazz chords, and the movable shapes for each, while also showing you where you'll usually play them in the major chord scale for your progressions. And as a bonus, I'll throw in some extra shapes you can use for the chords you already know. Let's start with the different types of major chords. Regular major chords can be played on the 1, 4, and 5, but also on the major 3 as an outside chord like we talked about earlier. Every other major extension is primarily played on the 1 and 4. The major add 9 can also be played on the 5. The major 6 can also be played on the 5. The major 7 sharp 11 is more abstract and sounds interesting mainly on the 4, but also on the 1. Regular minor chords are played on the 2, 3, and 6. Minor 7ths are also played on the 2, 3, and 6. and the rest of the minor extensions are usually played on just the 2 and 6. Now the minor 11th also sounds good on the 3 and can even be played on the 7. The minor flat 6 is more uncommon than the others and is really only used on the 3 and 6. Pretty much every single dominant extension is going to be played on the 5 and 3 with a few exceptions. The dominant 9 generally sounds better on the 5 than the 3. The dominant 11 also generally sounds better on the 5 than the 3. The dominant 7 sharp 11 can only be played on the 5. And the dominant 13th also generally sounds better on the 5 than the 3. The dominant 13 flat 9 can only be played on the 5. The sus2 and sus4 chords can be played on chords 1 through 6, with the exclusions being sus2 on the 3 and sus4 on the 4. Dominant 7th sus2 chords can be played on the 5, 6, and 2. And dominant 7th sus4 chords can be played on the 5, 6, 2, and 3. These chords can be used in the same ways I showed you could use regular sus chords earlier in the video, but instead of having the freedom to play them on chords 1 through 6, they're really only used in their designated spots. Major 7th sus2 chords are basically a slightly modified major 7th chord, so it's going to be used in the same spots, 1 and 4. The sus2 13 chord acts as a dominant chord and is usually just played on the 5. So now you've got 8 major chords, 9 minor chords, 10 dominant chords, and 6 sus chords to plug and play in your own progressions. Now I know your brain might be about to break from all the shapes I just showed you, and it may seem pretty daunting to try memorizing all of them, but there is a reasonable way to approach it. What I recommend doing is memorizing 2 to 3 shapes from the same chord type. For example, like learning a couple of the shapes I showed you for the major 7th chord. You want to internalize these shapes and fingerings by incorporating them in your own progressions and taking advantage of the spots I showed you could use them in. Or by practicing songs and exercises that include these chords, which I happen to have plenty of for each chord type on Guitar Accelerator. Then once you don't have to think hard about how to make the shapes every time you play them, add in a few more and keep repeating that process until you've memorized all the chords you want to use. Now I'm going to play a 4, 5, 6, 3 progression a few times in different zones, but every time I play it, I'm going to use different voicings on each chord to show you how drastically it can change the tone of a progression. And just to clarify, voicings is another way of saying chord shapes. And here's a couple more examples of using those chords in action. And that's the end of level 3. So as a quick recap, the main way you can spice up your progressions is by swapping out the regular major and minor chords in the chord scale with alternate voicings and extensions. We now have 4 main categories of chords to work with: major, minor, dominant, and suspended, with each having many different types and voicings to choose from. Most types of major chords can be played on the 1 and 4 in the chord scale, while the major add 9 can also be played on the 5, and the regular major chord can also be played on the 5 and 3. Most types of minor chords can be played on the 2 and 6. The regular minor and minor 7th chords can also be played on the 3. The minor 11th can also be played on the 3 and 7, and the minor flat 6 can only really be played on the 3 and 6. Pretty much every type of dominant chord can be played on the 5 and 3, with the dominant 9th, 11th, and 13th preferably sounding better on the 5 rather than the 3. And the dominant 7 sharp 11 and dominant 13 flat 9 can only be played on the 5. Sus2 and Sus4 chords can be played on chords 1 through 6, with the exceptions being Sus2 on the 3 and Sus4 on the 4. The major 7 Sus2 is just like a major extension and can be played on the 1 and 4. The dominant 7 Sus2 can be played on the 5, 6, and 2. The dominant 7 Sus4 can be played on the 5, 6, 2, and 3. And finally, the Sus2 13 can be played on the 5. I hope with all these new chord shapes at your disposal, you can cook up some awesome progressions. Now I know all of the examples I showed here were in the key of C major, but I want to reiterate that these chords and the positions they're used in are universal across every key. When you want to change the key of your progression, you're just moving the scale shape, which in turn moves the root notes of the chords around. And just like in level 2, all of the rules I discussed here are just general guidelines, so I urge you to keep experimenting even if it does break the rules sometimes. You should always trust your ear. And if you want to help support this channel so I can keep making the best content I can for you guys, consider checking out Guitar Accelerator or my Patreon in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, liking and subscribing would also be much appreciated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.